And I think that we sometimes forget that the way God makes us more persevering and more patient, more long suffering is through the trials.
Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Lawson, I was on a Bible study call recently. It's great, and it's very well done, and I love it. It's weekly. I learn a lot from it. But the guy said something that is common in kind of Christian circles to say, but is actually kind of funny when you think about it. And what he said was, he said, God is the captain of my ship. Mm-hmm. And he meant it like powerfully, like, I've learned to trust God. Mm-hmm. And his point was well taken. And he had great, ideas throughout the study. Like, it was all great. But what I started laughing about, I got off the call and I wrote down on a Post-it note, God is the captain of, and I put the word "my" in quotes, and I put God is the captain of my ship. And I thought, it's kind of funny. It's really not my ship. Like if you think of it biblically, it's not my ship. And if it were, I don't think God would want to take the demotion to step down from King of the Universe to being the captain of my ship. And I thought, I don't know, it just struck me as funny. I've heard that phrase 100 times. And this one time it struck me as funny. And then lo and behold, you and I are going to record a podcast on trusting God. And I thought, man, the timing of that was fantastic, because Jesus said he did not come down with an agenda and a set of things he was trying to accomplish. He came down trying to accomplish the will of the Father, the will of the one who sent me. And I think if we get our theology right, that number one, none of our assets are our own. All we are stewards. We are not owners of anything. We are stewards. And secondly, what we do with those things is not our own call. It is actually God's call. And we're just trying to be faithful listeners as dads, especially as we lead our families. So I'm looking forward to today's show a lot, because I have a lot to learn about trusting God. I'll explain why as we get into the show. Before we go any farther, I want to encourage our listener to be more like David. And I know what you're thinking, Lawson.
Yeah.
Who's David? David?
I went to like the story of the Bible and David.
Okay, good. Because that's not the David I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about the David in the Bay Area in California. He recently sent us a donation to Manhood Journey, because we are donor supported. 80+% of our funds every year come from donations from people like David. And we couldn't do podcasts. We couldn't do newsletters. We couldn't do all of the things that we do if we didn't have faithful financial support from people like David. And he said in his donation, he put a little note there and he said, so thankful for the guides, the podcast, and Mountain Mondays. Happy face. So listen, here's the deal. Go be like David. And number one, be grateful. Even if you don't tell us, you're not even grateful for Manhood Journey, just go be grateful. Tell somebody you're thankful for what they did for you. Because, man, I really appreciated that little note in his donation. And then secondly, consider financially supporting Manhood Journey like David, because we can't do what we do without the faithful financial support. So Lawson, what we're going to talk about today is trusting God, and we're going to do it through the lens of a guy in the Old Testament named Joseph. Get us started.
Yeah, I do want to say I get what that guy was saying about captain of the ship. Maybe if he had said captain of the ship instead of captain of my ship, maybe you wouldn't have gone off so hard on him. I'm just teasing. But basically, the intent behind what he's saying, I agree with, is we aren't at the wheel. And if we can remember that, that really helps. But today, sorry, I'm a little stuffy. Today,
Lawson's powering through today. For you, Dad, Lawson will do anything. And today he's recording a podcast, even though he doesn't feel like
That's
100%
great.
of himself.
I'm good. Yeah, talking about Joseph, the story of Joseph in the Bible, not Joseph, some guy that made a nice donation and put a little nice card in there.
Although if your name is Joseph and you happen to have some extra spending cash, send it our way.
How Joseph's life is indicative of, he went through these challenges where he relied on God to get him through, and he continued to believe in God's plan for his life through some serious adversity. And he was left alone, he was imprisoned, he was falsely accused, and throughout it all, he had faith that God was going to get him through this stuff. And I didn't think about this until I was listening to you talking about David. You are a great example of going out in faith and trusting God. I specifically remember the phone call that we had over a decade ago, almost probably, where you had, you and April had made the decision to leave a good corporate job and go out in faith and start a ministry and go full time. And you are an example of putting your trust where it belongs, because you at the time were not like, I think I've got these talents and I'm going to go. You could have started a business that did something similar to a manhood journey, but was not for God. It could have been something that was for profit. But I love that you came together, you trusted that God had a plan and that he had put you through certain things and developed in you certain skills that led to you being his tool to begin doing something that has now benefited a lot of dads out there. So I'm really proud of you for that. And it reminded me too of, I lost a job. I was actually let go. I was not in the right role, wasn't doing a good job, trying really hard, stirring up a lot of dust, but wasn't getting very far. And then the guy realized it, and I didn't feel like it at the time, but he did me a favor and took me out of that job.
Gave you other career exploration opportunities.
Right. It didn't put me into something else at his company. He just took me out of that job. And
feel free to come back on Monday. We just will no longer be paying you.
You can go to work, just not here. And he did it so graciously and with respect, and really taught me a lesson on how to let somebody go. But I was worried. We had two little, Olivia was like a baby, and Abigail was a young toddler. And we had bought a new home. We had, car payment, all this stuff. And I hadn't yet learned how to be a good steward of money. So losing that job that put us in some trouble. Like, we actually had to sell both cars. We sold some furniture. I mean, it was like, knuckle or nail biting time. Anyway, soon after I lost a job, I was at home. I walked into the bathroom. Audrey was bathing the girls, both of them in the tub. And I remember this vividly. Audrey knew me really well, and she knew that I was worried and I was taking responsibility for it all. And, as a guy, it kind of hit it didn't kind of hit my ego. It hit my ego pretty hard.
Sure.
And, she stood up from the tub, and walked over and took both my hands and said, let's make a promise to each other right now that whenever the day comes, and it will be here, when you are in some new job and you are loving life and God has gotten us through whatever this time is, let's make a promise right now that that we may be stressed, we may be frustrated, we may be fearful, but let's not take it out on each other. And let's build each other up through this and learn together what God's plan is. and like, dude, the level of trust and the level of faith that she had
Mm.
was all that I needed, and she was there for me. And sure enough, the day came and I was able, even it took a little while. It took months and then even years later for me to look back and see God's hand through certain things that he revealed,
Wow.
through hindsight in a couple of cases. Um,
Mm.
but Audrey was the one who said, "Hey, look, let's put our faith and our trust where it belongs,
Wow.
and that is in God. He's got us. So let's just commit right now to getting each other through
Mm.
whatever this is together."
Hey, Chris, today in the church, we seem to have this crisis of manhood where we're still wrestling with even, gosh, what's a man? What is he at all? What's he to do? How's he to behave? And so in that light, we're struggling, I think, in the church with discipling men. Why are we struggling with that? And what can we do about it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. We're struggling with discipling men largely because men think church is boring. They come to church and it's very feminized, right? From the colors to singing about drowning in an ocean of God's love. Like they're just not interested in that. But that's just the way it is because that's the base of the church today, and a lot of churches cater to their base. So we're losing men from the very beginning. They're already bored with church. They're not enamored with Jesus, right? They want a king, they want a captain, like they want someone to lead them into battle, and they're not seeing that. So where we're seeing progress is when we drill down and we kind of go to that micro level and we look at discipling men, that 2 to 3 on one discipleship process where we're really showing men who Jesus is, like the authentic Jesus, not white, long-haired, in a dress, driving a Prius hippie Jesus, like not him, and nothing wrong with driving a Prius. I mean, gas prices are ridiculous. I get it. But like the Jesus of scripture that commands respect and authority and affection and things of that nature. So we show them the true Jesus and then who they are in this Jesus. I mean, they're kings, bro, like kings in training. And we create just a greater affection and following for Jesus in men.
Better Man is one of our ministry partners. We love what Chris and his team there are doing. If you or your church is looking for a group study for your men to go through that covers the essentials of biblical manhood and helps men have a clear vision of how they can be as a man, they can gain confidence, become the man they want to be, improve relationships, and create a more purposeful life, check out the resources from our friends Better Man. You can find those at betterman.com. Man, that's really powerful that Audrey had that level of discernment. I had a similar experience. I was fired twice, and not so much just because I was quote unquote in the wrong job. I just wasn't doing very well. I was fired twice in a very short time frame. And I remember April saying something to me also as impactful along the way, except hers went something like, "You better get your act together. Get it straight." No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I know she listens. I just do that for her. She actually said something very similar. She said something like, "Man, I'm not sure why this is happening, but I know that we're going to get through this. And I know we're going to figure this out." And I just remember her being super encouraging, even at a time when she could have been really critical and could have been very questioning of where we were. Because this wasn't one of those where, Joseph was wrongly treated. And Joseph was falsely accused. I was probably rightly treated, and I was probably appropriately accused of patheticness in the role. And so it's funny because in that case, April could have taken a more, what's the right word? Could have taken a more critical posture, but instead she was encouraging and supportive and, believed we would get on the other side of this in a way that was really, enlightening, what's the right word? Inspiring, at the time. And I just remember her placing her trust, not so much in me, like she wasn't saying, "You're my hero,"
Right.
but she was saying, "Hey, the three of us, between God, you and me, we are going to figure this out." And I really appreciated
Love
that looking back. So very similar in how April reacted to how Audrey reacted. That's cool.
How was our trust challenged? You put some cool stuff in the show notes I've never seen before. Number one, principles are challenged through temptations. I see the pattern here. Principles through temptations. Perseverance is challenged through trials. Patience is challenged by timing. I like that. Perseverance through trial. Patience is challenged by timing. Go deeper on that. I think there's some good stuff there.
Yeah, I think, like, for example, you see all of these in the life of Joseph. So, for example, kind of go in reverse order. The temptation that he had when the wife of the captain of the guard, his boss's wife, that was a temptation for him to indulge in something that was illicit and wrong and immoral, and he'd betray confidence and all that. And so his trust in God was challenged through that temptation. We see that clearly in that particular moment in Joseph's life. Trials, my goodness, sold into slavery, ridiculed and harangued by his brothers, forgotten by all kinds of people, put in jail, wrongly accused. He went through a lot of trials, and that those tested and eventually built, as James says, as Romans says, built his perseverance. Trials, we sometimes think of trials as the things we've got to get through. And that's true. That's true, right? Hopefully it's like a storm, on the ocean. You can see it coming at you, and then you get into it, it's raining, and then you get out of it, and then there's sunny skies. And we think of trials as that.
That's a good analogy.
However, sometimes they set in, and it's like it's a drizzle for a decade, or it's a hurricane for 3 years, it's like a really bad storm. And it's not just something that you knuckle down and quote unquote get through. It's something that you grow through, something that you become different. So if you're heading into a storm, or you find yourself in a storm right now, the question is, and I was on a prayer call the other day with a good friend of mine, and he's been in a decades long, kind of ongoing challenge that's family related. And I just said, hey man, I asked him the question that my friend Greg asked me 10 years ago. The situation you find yourself in, how is God using that to make you different? How's he using that to make you different? And I think that we sometimes forget that the way God makes us more persevering and more patient, more long suffering, is through the trials. It's almost like we think, well, can you just give me like a patience injection? Can I just get like the patience antidote, where you just put it in me real quick, and then when things don't go as fast as I want, I'll be patient. He goes, well, it actually kind of works the opposite way. What I do is I slow a bunch of things down so that you develop patience. And so patience is tested by timing. And so there have been moments. So like, as an example, you mentioned Manhood Journey. At the time of recording this episode, it's the summer of 2023. We've been rolling as a ministry officially for 10 years, unofficially for 13. So about a decade, plus or minus. And we just can see now that we've reached about 1 million dads between all the different outlets that we've had, the version Bible plans, the Bible studies, the events we've done, our online traffic, this podcast, all that combined has had us reach roughly 1 million dads. And it's actually quite a bit more. I go conservative on the numbers, but it's 1 million for sure. And when we look at that and we divide it by the total budget we've had over that period of time, there's no rational explanation for why we've reached that many dads. Yeah. And it's not because Kent's so smart or Kent took such a big risk. It is because God wanted to do something. And in doing it, he's actually made me, in fact, Hunter, our producer, will laugh at this, because he's made me more patient, more long-suffering, more willing to accept, bumps in the road. And then I know what Hunter's thinking. Wow, this is the patient version of Kent. Yeah, man, it is. Good thing you didn't work with me 10 years ago. And so when I look at all that and I think about this notion of trust, a couple words come to mind. One is you have to trust in light of uncertainty, right? So for example, if I kind of know how I think my schedule is going to go over the next several months. I'm planning for things that are 2 and 3 and 4 months away. I'm planning for things that are even a year away. I have plans, and I kind of have an idea of how my schedule is going to go. And I have a really good idea of how today is going to go. I know what I'm doing right now. I know what I'm doing in an hour. I know. And so as time gets closer to me, I get more and more certain of how things are going to play out. right up until I don't, right? Right up until God throws a wrench into those plans, at which time I got to say to myself, well, did I trust in my planning, or do I trust in this sovereign God of the universe who's up to something? I love how John Piper used to say it. He said it one time in a tweet. He said, God's up to 10,000 things at any given moment, and we're aware of 2 or 3. And I just think, wow,
that's cool.
That is really powerful. And so for me, the trust comes in the form of, number one, uncertainty. Like, in other words, if you're just trusting in something that you know, well, that's not really trust. Secondly, trust comes in the form of the capacity of the being in which I'm trusting, right? So for example, if you've ever flown on an airplane, you know, you don't have major trust issues because you got on the plane, and instead of walking on and making a left and getting in the cockpit, you walked on and made a right, and you went down the aisle and just took your seat. Who was flying that plane? You have no idea. How long were they trained? You have no idea. How many people were up in that cockpit? Might be 2. You have no idea whose hands you just put your life into for the next hour or 5, or in some cases, like we had one flight coming back from Africa that was 18 hours long. You have no idea whose hands you've put your life into. Yet you trust. Why? Is it because you've dove into the training manuals at Delta and you know exactly what they went through? No, you have no idea. Unless you're a pilot yourself, you have no idea what they went through. You're trusting because you're making decisions based on experiences you and others have had with that thing. You know, people who've flown on airplanes and lived, probably thousands. You know, you've been on airplanes and lived, etc. And as you go down, you end up developing a trust in a system of training pilots and making sure they're psychologically stable and all that, even though you yourself aren't in control. So uncertainty in the future is a huge component of trust. And the more uncertain, the more your trust is probably going to be tested. And secondly, the being in which you've put your trust. And so I'm putting my trust in an airline pilot, you know, for a few hours. Every time you drive down a 2-lane highway, you put your life in the hands of, you know, 500 or 5,000 people who drive past you the other direction, that they're going to stay in their lane. And so when we do that, we take trust for granted right up until something doesn't go our way. And then we get all bent out of shape, kind of like Job. And I'm not trying to minimize what Job went through. Job went through a dramatic set of experiences, Joseph as well. When you look at their life and you can look back and go, why don't you just trust God? Well, it's because we see the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever watched a sporting event, you know, on DVR, and you know what the outcome is, well, you don't have the same emotional roller coaster as you do if you're watching it in real time. And we're all living our lives in real time, and we don't exactly know what tomorrow will bring. And so then what really gets tested is, do we trust God? Do we trust God? Wouldn't it have been interesting? You know, Joseph was in prison for a long time. Wouldn't it have been interesting to be able to pop in and visit him at various moments during his prison stay after being falsely accused and just saying, hey man, how's it going? Like, I just love, what would he have said? Would he have like gritted teeth and been like, oh, that stupid cupbearer, I told him to remember me and I haven't heard back, you know? Or would he be like, man, it's another day in the neighborhood. I'm so glad. Won't you be my neighbor? Like, aren't you just excited? And Joseph's like, you know, putting on his second pair of sandals. And he's like, you know, he's like Mr. Robin. I'm just curious, because I don't think trust is always super clean or neat or tidy. And what I mean by that is sometimes we trust God through like white knuckles and gritted teeth. Mm-hmm. Is that good? I'm not saying that. I'm not endorsing that behavior, right. But I'm saying sometimes trusting is harder than it is. I was just on a prayer call yesterday, and one of my friends was visiting with a pastor, a friend of his, and this pastor was driving down the road and with his daughter in front of him, and she was killed in a car accident right in front of him. Like, he saw it happen. This has been a while, you know, it's been some time ago, but like, man, when that's unfathomable. Like it's like, what? And we can't just apply these simple, like Joseph and Job, like end of story type.
Absolutely.
Oh, right. Hey, pastor, trust. There's a purpose and all. man, how unkind and uncaring would that be?
Mm.
But the ability to trust through that, the ability to trust through that process is maybe not necessarily easy or squeaky clean or simple. And I think I know a lot of dads who I respect and I love who have had to trust God through some really challenging times. A good friend of mine who lost his wife in her 40s, he just honestly said to me one time, he goes, man, if this is how God treats his friends, and he just kind of let it hang. And he's on the other side, right? I mean, he's healed and not that he would, it's not ever forgotten. It's not ever gone. The pain isn't necessarily gone. However, he's learned to trust God again, even despite the fact, though he slay me, yet I will trust him.
So trust can be, I think I'm talking out loud here, but trust can be learned. Trust can be strengthened like a muscle. And sometimes that may mean that it has to be used, that God is going to instruct us prayerfully, hopefully not through some tragedy. Like you mentioned that man, that hurts your heart there. I was talking to excuse me. I was talking to a guy at work, and he was reflecting back about, he's got young kids and a couple older kids as well. He was reflecting back during, remember that time when COVID began and nobody really knew much at all about it. We weren't sure what this was going to do.
Talk about uncertain future.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. There was a time, it was like, you had people going, it's going to be nothing. And other people thinking it was going to be, this life-changing apocalypse kind of thing and everything in between, but nobody really knew. Right. And so I was talking to him and he said, yeah, we've gone through it obviously now. And looking back, this is my point, looking back, he says he feels like they went overboard initially with their kids and he didn't even get into what that was, but like super restrictions. And after, whatever it was, a year or two later, he sat them down and they had like a family kind of talk, like a sort of a debrief. And he explained his rationale at the time, he and his wife, he explained his rationale of it was this big unknown. And so they erred on the side, he's like, look, we maybe erred on the side of too much caution. We learned a lot about what it was going to be, during, but didn't know at the time. And he reflected this by kind of saying, after the fact, he was able to see that his children had trusted in mom and dad. The kids didn't know anything. Some of them were too little to really understand. All they knew was they could go see their friends.
Right.
And so the reason he was saying that they kind of did this breakdown, this debrief talk, now that the kids are a little bit older, and was so that they could see they trusted in mom and dad.
Yeah.
But mom and dad were doing the best they could. But trusting in God is so different than trusting in mom and dad, because, wow. And I love that he was, I asked him, I actually asked him yesterday, like, what do you think of when we talk about trusting in God as a dad? And he was the one that came up with this answer, this story. He said, we try to do what's best. We think we know what's best. God actually knows what's best. And so trusting in mom and dad versus trusting in God's perfected goodness for us, completely two different things. And so sometimes we can see how our trust is built with hindsight. Yeah. And I think it's useful. The point of that story is that it is useful to use opportunities after the fact, hindsight opportunities, to talk with our kids, talk about it with our buddies, talk about it with our wives, because that reinforces how we can trust. And I'm not going to go back to the story of God being the captain of my ship, but you can see, you can see
I dare
that, right. You can see after the fact, like I did when I lost my job, and then ultimately wound up finding something else that grew from there to something else. And you look backwards and go, wow, there were 10,000 things going on, and at the time I didn't see any of them.
Yeah.
And then shortly after, God revealed two, and that was what I needed. But there was all these other things happening too.
And what's really interesting is, as we look at stories like Joseph, or we look at stories like Job, or even when you look at stories like Jesus himself, where he trusted in God all the way to the point of death, but he was resurrected and he's made king of the universe. There's all this elevation. We tend to look at trust as this thing that we do until it works out great. Because when we look back through these stories, we're like, oh man, wasn't that cool how Joseph trusted? And then he became second in command.
Right.
And the end is all Hollywood, right? It's always Hollywood. It's yay. Oh, he wins. Job trusted up until God restored everything and gave him even more. And so the end of the story of Joseph is all up and to the right. The end of the story of Job is all up and to the right. The end of the story of Jesus is all up and to the right. However, what God's asking us to do always is trust him, even if the upper right-hand quadrant never gets realized in that area. So like, as an example, when you look at Paul, when Paul trots out his defense of his own apostleship, and he talks about, I was beaten, I was left for dead, I was forsaken, I was sick, I was ill. And he goes through all that. I remember having lunch one time with a gentleman in London, England, and he was talking to me about going into the ministry. This is before I went full-time, Lawson. And he goes, so let me take a guess. And he was a really nice guy. This will make him sound like he was more, sarcastic than I mean, but he was to the point. He was blunt. But he goes, let me take a guess. You and your wife, what's her name again? I said, April. He goes, you and your wife, April, y'all have a house? I go, yeah. And he goes, a couple cars? And I said, yeah. And he goes, a few kids? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, American dream, right? And I said, sure, exactly. And he goes, are you willing to go into ministry if none of that gets any better? Are you willing to go into ministry if God tells you you need to move into an apartment? Are you willing to go into ministry if God tells you you need to get rid of one of your cars so you can afford, food? And he goes, look through scripture at those who followed God's plan and ask yourself, how did it work out for them financially? And many of them, the answer wasn't financial benefit. The answer was faithfulness. And so we tend to I'll call it, and we might get some hate mail on this, of course, but I'll call it, we Americanize some of these principles, right? With Marlboro Man, victory, success, win, conquer. And we go, yeah, those stories in the Bible are the ones where in the end, the good guy wins. And in some cases and here's the beauty of what God's story is, right? In the end, we do win. In the end. Right? After our life, after our death, the victory far outweighs, as Paul
that's
said,
what I was going to say. Right.
Light and momentary afflictions. They don't even compare. To the glory that awaits us. And so in some ways we trust, and we think of trusting as, I'm going to trust because I know God has a plan for me. And then we fill in this blank that scripture doesn't totally fill in, because I know that God has a plan for me that's going to work out great, like a Disney story while I'm alive. Maybe not. Right? I don't think Joni Eareckson Tada is going to just start walking tomorrow. Like, she's not just going to all of a sudden be out of her wheelchair. Like, that's just probably not going to happen. And those who want to say, oh, you don't have enough faith, well, ask her what she thinks. And so I just think that when she can walk and run and jump, we'll be on the other side of this life. And I think that for us as dads, especially, is the essence of how we trust. Are we trusting for a rosy outcome on earth? Or are we trusting because God has promised he will never leave us or forsake us? And the outcome, the on earth outcome. I love the verse in Proverbs 3 that we trot out when we're talking about trust. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your path straight. And it goes on to say, for he is the captain of your ship. No, it doesn't. I'm just kidding. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And it says, and lean not on your own understanding. So as we're trying to wrestle with this idea of trust, do we say a lot? Well, I think, and then you fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been really thinking about this, and I think, and you keep thinking, and you got to, what happens if this go back? Rewind back.
Right.
To the part where you said, I think. I'm not saying don't think. Be a thinker. One of my favorite communicators in the world was Tim Keller. Great thinker, brilliant thinker. But in our own understanding, some of God's plans may not make sense.
Yeah, don't lean on our own understanding, like you said.
Don't lean on it. Don't lean on it. In all our ways, submit to him. We're going to put ourselves under him. We're going to submit under, and he will make your path straight. So as we do that as dads, I want to encourage a dad listening. Couple things. One, Lawson, you said something a minute ago that was remarkable that I just want to double click on. And that is, we are asked to put our trust in a holy, infinite, and perfect God. Our kids are being asked to trust in us sometimes, like your friend at work. That's a lot of pressure. And that's a lot of responsibility. And in some ways, I want dads to own that. I want you to embrace it and say, man, when I tell my kid, God loves you, they just believe me up until life bumps into them on something where they go, does he really love me? I mean, my dad said so, but I'm going to have to discover that for myself. I remember when one of my kids came to me and said, Dad, I believe the Bible just because you and mom do. And that's really not good enough. And I'm like, awesome.
Yeah, that's right.
I chucked some books at him and walked through the season. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You're going to have to own that. And you don't have to own it. Like, you can choose to ignore it. Like, free country, like there's choices. And the second thing I want to encourage a dad with is, number one, sometimes your family has to trust you, and man, embrace the power and the responsibility of that. Secondly, as they age and as they start to get mature, and even as they get in their older teen years and leave your house, guess what you're going to have to do? Return the favor and trust them. So here's where I had a very interesting conversation with my wife and one of my sons the other day about that middle time between they're not a teenager anymore, they're a young adult, but they still kind of live in your home. And there's this middle season where you've got to learn to trust them at some level, where their management of their schedule, their ability to make their work appointment on time, their money management. And like, there's things where you just got to learn to let go, and you've got to learn to return the favor to your kids and trust them to make certain choices. I remember one of my oldest son recently bought a house, and really throughout the process didn't seek my feedback a whole lot. And on one level I was like, well, man, I probably could have helped him. On the other level, I'm like, good on him, man. He can go buy a house without me. Praise the Lord. I've worked myself out of a job. Like, I mean, that was my intent when he was 4, was get him to that place. And so when our kids start to figure that out, sometimes we bristle and we want to come in as a hyper controlling parent of an adult child. We got to return the favor. We got to return the trust favor and let our young adults be young adults.
Well said. I love that. Yep. Yeah, Hunter.
Would you care to comment?
I thought you were landing the plane. That's hilarious.
And come on back next week for an episode, which we will again abruptly end. I dare you. God is the captain of our ship, and he decided we were done talking. Man, this is fantastic. It's like a passenger on the airplane taking over the flight. This is perfect. I'm going to talk you down. Okay, right. Step 1, don't panic. Whatever you do, remain calm.
You almost went Chris Farley just then.
Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, Subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.